We welcome you as we celebrate Earth Day in nearly all corners of the world. I'm Julia Visconti, Senior Advisor in the U.S. Department of Energy and a Lead Countries team member of the Nice Future Initiative. This is part 2 of our Youth in Clean Energy series. Part 1 is available for replay on the Nice Future and IYNC websites. We had a fantastic lineup of speakers and discussion for part 1, and I'm so excited today to hear our intriguing lineup and their comments. Today's webinar is also being recorded and will be available for replay. More than 800 have registered for the 2 webinars, and it is clear that there is a significant interest from around the world in hearing perspectives from different generations, including youth, on shaping our clean energy future. These 2 webinars address such questions as, in what ways can nuclear energy in combination with renewables accelerate progress on energy and climate goals while advancing environmental justice, uplifting communities, and promoting workforce diversity? How can youth engage in discussions about sustainable energy planning and energy transitions? Today we address a variety of clean energy strategies and approaches, from policy to finance to technology, to fostering a highly talented, motivated, and diverse workforce of the future. We are pleased to include a speaker to tell us about experience in Africa, in particular Ghana. Today we have asked each speaker to start with a 7-minute talk. Following all the talks, we will have a Q&A session. Please use the chat function in WebEx to post your questions. I want to thank Patrick Hughes for providing technical support for the webinar today. Special thanks also go to the 3 co-sponsors of this webinar: Nice Future Initiative, IYNC, and Equal by 30. Nice Future is the sole nuclear energy workstream of the Clean Energy Ministerial. Its vision is a world where nuclear innovations advance clean energy goals. Check out our website and sign up for updates to see how Nice Future is shaping the minister level conversations at the May 31st through June 6th Clean Energy Ministerial all virtual meeting hosted by Chile. Another Clean Energy Ministerial workstream, Equal by 30, is also shaping the future by championing equal pay, equal leadership, and equal opportunities for women in the clean energy sector. You will hear from IYNC next on their important efforts around the world to give youth a voice on clean energy. They have championed this webinar, and I'm very grateful for all your hard work on these webinars, Kelsey Green. I turn to my webinar co-leader, Kelsey Green. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia, and hello everyone. My name is Kelsey, and I'm the Climate Change Project Chair for the International Youth Nuclear Congress, or IYNC for short. I'm very happy to be here and very happy that all of you are attending. Thank you for taking the time to join. I would also like to thank the webinar co-sponsors, the Nice Future Initiative and the Equal by 30 campaign of SEM, as well as IYNC. Today, we will learn about how clean energy policy and financing can enable just energy transitions and help us meet our climate and energy goals. Importantly, we will also see how youth are playing pivotal roles in the policy space and are taking initiative to create the sustainable future that they want. Amplifying youth involvement in clean energy is a topic that is near and dear to IYNC, as we are a global network of young volunteers promoting the use of nuclear technologies in support of furthering the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. IYNC members are dedicated to developing new approaches to communicating the benefits of nuclear power as part of low-carbon, balanced energy mixes, and to working to transfer knowledge from the current generation of scientists to the next. I very much look forward to the speaker's remarks on how to involve more youth perspectives in meeting climate and energy goals for the betterment of Earth and everyone on it. In order to amplify voices of youth from around the world, this Youth in Clean Energy series is also holding virtual workshops for youth 35 and under. The first workshop took place on April 15th. I want to express Julia and my appreciation to the talented Jeremy Gordon from the Fluent in Energy Consulting for leading this amazing training opportunity. Participants learned how to communicate their involvement in just energy transitions to further climate and energy goals. I wanted to share one participant's social media post that was made as a result of the workshop. Next slide, please. Josh from Ghana says that an equitable transition to clean energy means leaving no one behind. He stressed that knowledge is power, and hence it is incumbent on all of us to empower the youth with education. Thank you, Josh, for sharing your story and for setting the stage for today's discussion. which will no doubt discuss the need for education and developing the diverse, talented youth workforce for the future. I hope youth listening will participate in our next interactive event on April 29th. I assure you that it will be a great treat for everyone who participates. Before moving on, I must mention that this WebEx call is being recorded and may be posted on DOE's website or used internally. If you do not wish to have your voice recorded, please do not speak during the call. If you do not wish to have your image recorded, please turn off your camera or participate by phone. If you speak during the call or use a video connection, you are presumed consent to recording and use of your voice or image. All right, it is now my pleasure to introduce the moderator for today's webinar, Christian Vega. Christian Vega is the IYNC Vice President for the term 2020 to 2022. Christian has been involved with IYNC since 2016 and has held multiple leadership roles. In his professional life, Christian has held various nuclear science research and development positions in Argentina, France, and currently in the Netherlands. Christian shares his passion for nuclear energy in articles and at international conferences, and we are happy to have him moderating today.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you. Thank you very much, Kelsey. I'm honored to virtually be here, and thank you both, Julia and Kelsey, for the opportunity to moderate this fascinating webinar. Also, thank you all to the participants connected, and please do not hesitate to use the chat function to post your questions and enhance this discussion with your views. This is very important as well. As Julia mentioned, today is April 22nd. We celebrate the Earth Day in nearly all corners of the world. This is a day to critically reflect on our relationship with the environment and to take actions. The Earth is warming because of human activity, and we have every reason to believe that at some point the impact will be catastrophic. We have already raised the temperature at least 1 degree Celsius in the pre-industrial time, and if we don't reduce emissions, we will probably have between 1.5 and 3 degrees of warming by the middle century, and between 4 and 8 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. There's a big important number that we all need to know. It's 51 billion. 51 billion is how many tons of greenhouse gases the world typically adds to the atmosphere every day. Our challenge is to drastically reduce these numbers soon. The world's biggest emitters have to get to net zero emissions by 2050. Middle-income countries need to get there soon after, and the rest of the world will eventually need to follow suit if we want to stop warming and avoid the worst effect of climate change. Now, everyone deserves the chance to live a healthy and productive life. There is no discussion about it from my standpoint. But currently, 860 million people don't have reliable access to electricity. This means that global energy demand will go up 50% by 2050 as low-income countries develop. And if nothing else changes, carbon emissions will go up by nearly as much. We need to get to zero while producing even more energy than we do today. But without adding any carbon to the atmosphere, I believe the world has never done anything quite like this before. Energy production accounts just for over a quarter of all emissions in the world, while the rest is divided among transportation, agricultural, keeping warm and cold, and the largest percentage, which is production processes like cement, steel, or plastic. However, energy production does represent much more than a quarter of the solution. With clean energy and production processes innovation, we could shift away from burning hydrocarbons and thus decarbonizing our economy by creating quality jobs. Finally, from my perspective, it is important to learn from the failures and incorporate the lessons into the next venture. As I mentioned, climate change means a great risk for humanity. But with every risk, there's also great opportunities. And we already have most of what it takes to succeed. We understand the problem, and we have ambition, led by the passion of growing global movements, led by the young people who are deeply concerned about the consequences of climate change. Then we have established big goals for solving this problem. What we need now is a clear and concrete plan to achieve our goals. Today we have a great and diverse panels conformed by great professionals to discuss these matters and address solutions. It is my pleasure then to introduce our first speaker. Dr. Michel Barthelemy is a nuclear energy analyst at the Organization for Cooperation and Development Nuclear Energy Agency. where he leads international projects on economics of nuclear. Prior to joining the NEA in 2019, Dr. Barthelemy was in charge of the nuclear energy economics studies at the French Atomic and Alternative Energy Commissions since 2015. So Michel, thank you very much for being here today, and the floor is yours.
Here we go. Sorry. Well, good morning, good afternoon. I'm trying to put in screen mode. Here we go. For me to join you this afternoon, I've set myself an impossible task, which is to cover 4 reports in 7 minutes. So we better get started. And what I really want to do is talk to you about assessing the cost of decarbonizations, but really as we do that, to try to focus on some of the key policy implications and recommendations that we derived from our studies at the OECD Nuclear Energy Agency. And to do that, we like to start with this slide, which is trying to give you a better idea about what are the key different costs of electricity. You will often hear when in the headlines about plant level cost, about renewable wind, solar breaking new record in terms of cost reduction, which is very good news for the climate. However, this only gives you a partial view about the cost of electricity, in particular because it doesn't talk about the cost at the grid level in terms of integrating these technologies, in terms of the grid itself. And it also doesn't talk about what we will refer to in economics as externalities, meaning in particular social and environmental cost. Some of them it's easy to put a value on, typically climate change. You can debate about the cost of carbon, but you can put a value to that. For others, it's much more difficult, such as environmental impact, land use typically. But nevertheless, when we think about the cost of electricity, in particular for decarbonization strategies, it's important to try to keep in mind these 3 aspects. And I will try to walk you some of them today. In particular, starting from the plant level cost, there's quite a lot to say on this. We published late last year a flagship report we do every 5 years with the IEA on the political cost of generating electricity, which is offering a forward-looking view of electricity cost in OECD countries. And these 2 major results when it comes to nuclear. First is that long-term operation of nuclear can be extremely competitive. In fact, it is the most competitive solution in most OECD countries. And secondly, is that when we look at the cost of nuclear new builds, and by that I'm primarily talking here about large Gen 3 reactors, we see that there is a clear window of opportunity for cost reductions, leading to improvement in competitiveness. Now, for both of these issues, from a policy standpoint, it means that there needs to be action, in particular for cost reductions. If we don't make use of this window of opportunities, it will close eventually. And similarly, for long-term operation, although the costs are very competitive, there are in a number of countries, typically in the US, significant issues with the electricity market, meaning that operators are not able to recover the cost on wholesale markets. And so here again, the policy framework will play a critical role. What I've not mentioned, but that is also very important for nuclear new build, is the issue about nuclear new build financing. You can see here on this figure that the cost of nuclear new build is essentially a linear function of the cost of capital. And what it means is that as the cost of capital increase about 5–6%, financial cost becomes a major component of the cost of electricity. So anything that government can do to make sure that nuclear can have access to affordable capital and financing is clearly going to play a key role in making sure that nuclear power is and remains competitive. And the good news is that there's quite a few things that government can do if they come to terms with the fact that nuclear power is needed as part of decarbonization strategies. I'm just mentioning some examples here, but clearly or just one-size-fits-all solution. About system cost. And to do that, I first maybe need to stop to how we do that. And essentially, system cost, you can look at it in terms of three key components that are illustrated here in very simple terms. First, we have what we call profile cost. And you can think about them as backup, meaning that when the wind is not blowing and at night, you're going to need to have some backup capacity. It might not be one for one, but there is going to be a cost somewhere in the system to provide backup. And secondly, when we think about what we refer to as variable renewable, wind, solar, interestingly, they are more difficult to predict, meaning you're going to have a balancing cost in the sense that you're going to need to have more margins, short-term margins in your system. And third, a lot of variable renewables will tend to be more distant than the load center, meaning there's going to be higher cost for the grid. Now, one of the issues with this system cost is that by nature, they are very much system dependent. And it so means that it's hard to come up with, let's say, generic estimate of those costs, meaning that for policymakers, it's going to be hard for them to really understand the challenge of tackling this system cost. And this is one of the issues we face, and this is one of the things we try to do with our studies to provide evidence for policymakers in this field. Now, because I don't have time to go through our work in more detail, I'm going to jump straight to the results, which I had to do. But clearly, when we think about the system cost, you can that will tend to increase significantly with the share of variable renewable in the mix, and it can become a significant component of your cost of electricity. Now, I think what is important also to mention at this point is this issue of system cost is also important to help us think about complementarities between nuclear and renewable. In particular, one of the things that flexible nuclear will do is it will help to reduce the system cost. And so clearly, this is one of the areas in which you can show the values that advanced nuclear, flexible nuclear can bring to the system as a whole. And now I will finish with a report that we just published on small modular reactors. And I know that this is typically a topic which is often of keen interest. So the report has been published only a few days, weeks ago. I put here the link to our website. And I just wanted to stress one key finding from this study, which is when we think about small modular reactors and what it can bring to our global effort to decarbonization, is that often they will come in a way that complement and expand the nuclear market and the application of nuclear to the mix, looking at helping decarbonization of hard-to-abate sectors in heavy industry, but also typically coal replacement. Just to leave you with one key number, there's about 3,000 coal power plants that we know we have to, in the world, we have to shut down in the coming decade. Objectives. These are dispatchable plants, and it's hard to imagine you would replace them with only variable renewables. And if you replace them with gas power plants, you're only going to go halfway into meeting your climate target. So clearly, this is an area where small modular reactors, because of the size, because of the fact that will fit well with the site characteristics, could help significantly in expanding the role of nuclear to a global decarbonization effort. Now, in the interest of time, I will leave you with this slide, which is just to also highlight all the key area of policies that we see as being of high priority. Maybe we'll have time to go back to them during the Q&A, but at this point in time, I will stop and very happy to join the panel later for discussion.
Well, Michel, thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Christine King. Christine has spent most of her career working with teams to develop strategic initiatives that allowed their research to move beyond the benchtop and into the field. Most recently, worked with an immersion venture capital firm to bring private capital into advanced nuclear development. In her spare time, she's pursuing her second degree black belt in Taekwondo. Congratulations, that is very impressive. Thank you, Christine, for being here today, and please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. So I don't have any slides. You just get to look at my little headshot here. Good morning and happy Earth Day to everyone. I appreciate having this technology to reach all corners of the globe today. For those of you that don't know GAIN, the Gateway for Accelerated Innovation in Nuclear, which I lead. It is an initiative out of the Department of Energy focused on the commercialization of new nuclear technologies. And in this realm, what we aim to do is to bring the assets of within the DOE complex and make them easily available to private industry, such that they can either come in and use facilities, access different experts, but all of it is in support of their vision of their technology and how they want to bring it to market. In the realm of this particular discussion today, what I want to focus on is the importance of the public-private partnership and the role of government in that. The magnitude of the challenge in front of us for a transition to clean energy is massive, and we need to use our government dollars wisely, I think, to do a few things. One, we need to tackle things that are too large for the private sector to take on. For example, infrastructure issues is typically something that you would see your government tackle instead of private industry. We need to use our dollars and cost share arrangements to help move technologies closer to commercialization and deployment and closer to more private investment. Give technology really technologists a safe space to either succeed or fail. And personally, I would like to see the government serve as the first customer for many of these technologies through PPAs. Our federal and state policies are generally headed in the right direction. However, I see two issues. We need more money, and our policies need to be technology agnostic. Many thought leaders in this space discuss the need for every carbon-free technology we know about today and the necessity of the innovation of many more. And so it's not possible at this point in time for any of us to predict what our energy future or our energy mix will really look like. So it's important that we make sure that we don't paint ourselves into any particular corner, and we work to make sure our either technology agnostic or ensure that policies are technology inclusive. So I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the vehicles the US government has put in place for public-private partnership. And what I like about this is over the past 5 years, you've seen the Office of Nuclear Energy come forward with 3 distinct vehicles and a variety looking at different timescales of projects to be supportive to private industry. I'll start with one that GAIN leads, which is the Nuclear Energy Voucher. This is really meant to allow quick access to the national labs. We call it a voucher in particular because it is not money awarded to private industry. It is money that we use to pay the national lab either to run experiments or to have access to experts, but private industry defines the work scope. It's offered 4 times a year. We have a standard contracting mechanism, which allows us to go from award to work within a faster time frame. And it is meant to focus on a specific challenge. The duration is typically a year and up to $500,000 per project. What I'm most proud of, this program was started in 2016. We have awarded nearly $19 million and 54 projects, but most importantly, we've completed 27. The federal cost share on these projects is 80%. Also in 2016, the DOE created what's called the Industry FOA. If you want to find it, it's Industry Funding Opportunity 1817. It is a tiered approach. And I'm going to start similarly with the smallest project with the shortest duration. But since the inception of these projects, 38 projects have been started, awarded, with $287 million total funding. 115 of that, 115 million is private investment. So the regulatory assistance grant is the lowest tier. It's a one-year project up to $500,000, and the federal cost share is 80%. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It is a project meant to help you with specific issues or conversations as you're pursuing your license with the NRC. And we have 9 projects in that space. The advanced reactor development projects are a little bit longer duration, 2 years, up to $20 million in funding. And it's an 80-20 split with the federal government. When we have 23 projects in this space. This is meant to be specific capabilities associated with the advanced reactor. So you might see a focus on modeling or a focus on, for example, in molten salt reactors, maybe something associated with the development of salt. We have 23 projects underway in this space. And the longest projects started under the Industry FOA are the first of a kind demonstration projects. These are up to 3 years. The funding can be spanned between 10 and 40 million, and it's a 50-50 cost share. And we have 6 projects underway. Again, the name says it all. It's a first of a kind demonstration. And most recently, last fall, the DOE did the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Project funding opportunity. I think this one has gotten a lot of press. I won't spend a significant amount of time. What's interesting about this, we have awarded 10 projects. The initial funding is $210 million. The timing is a little bit different. So it's kind of looking from today out. The demonstration projects with X Energy and TerraPower are expected to complete in the next 5 to 7 years. It's a 50-50 cost share with those companies. We have 5 risk reduction projects, again, focused on specific components associated with their vision. That's Kairos Power, Westinghouse, BWXT, Holtec, and Southern Company. This is an 80-20 cost share. And then finally, looking at a little bit smaller projects, the advanced reactor concepts. And in that space, we have General Atomic, a company called Advanced Reactor Concepts. And sorry, I don't have the last one in front of me, MIT. Let me close with, what can you do? You can follow the progress of these projects. You can share what excites you about these projects. I invite you to understand what's going on with your local and regional clean energy policies and work to make your voice heard that it's important that these policies be technology inclusive. And with that, thank you very much.
Very good, Christine. Thank you very much for your presentation. And in a very interesting and also important topic, how to bring ideas to real life. So thank you very much. There's a lot to discuss on, and I'm looking forward to the discussion section of this webinar. Our next speaker is Dr. Seth Debra. Thank you, Seth, for being here today. Dr. Debra is a technical director of the Nuclear Power Institute of the Ghana Atomic Energy Commission, representing the technical arm of the government Nuclear Power Implementation Organization. Seth's area of specialization is pump thermohydraulics, modeling and simulations, and nuclear program infrastructure development, following the EIA lay-down practices. So, Dr. Seth, thank you very much for being here today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Christian, and good afternoon, everybody. I hope I'll be able to finish in 7 minutes. Happy Earth Day to everybody, and I hope we are able to take responsibility of the Earth, that we are able to actually take the dominion or manage it as we are supposed to. So just to start from where Christian left off, in terms of heavy emitters trying to limit their emissions, as they are also trying to limit their emissions, emerging economies must also learn from the various things that have been done, just to also not go through the same processes or the same challenges that we have now as a globe. So, in the spirit of this, the national energy policy of Ghana, and to be fair to most African nations, I think we have energy policies that have been developed by these nations. Clearly, there is a clear understanding of what needs to be done and what needs to be put in place. And Ghana is no exception. So our energy policy is still the Ministry of Energy, and it has clear goals for the generation mix that we have. So you have what you call the nuclear sector goals that is embedded in the policy. This policy also gives a clear direction on when to actually bring in nuclear power based on the demand supply analysis that has been conducted within the energy sector. It also identified challenges, which finance is one of them. But to go on, nuclear is seen as an alternative as to whatever we have in the mix, or currently in the mix. And we are supposed to integrate nuclear into the mix, one, to guarantee long-term supply security, and number two, also pay attention to climate change, because we all know the benefits of nuclear. And most African countries that are going in for nuclear is basically because of these two main things. It's for energy security and for climate change. With some comes with industrialization, the spin-off effects of nuclear and all that are there. But these are the two main things that actually drive the nuclear programs within the African region. Now, before we shift into a little bit of financing, which most countries, and including emerging countries, not just countries within Africa, find some difficulties in. See, we have a demand and supply issue over here that needs to be looked at. Also in terms of the great size and the capacity of our demand consumption within this region. So are there opportunities for supply from nuclear? Currently, if we say for Ghana, supply from nuclear, we will say no. But in the next 10 years, there should be supply or demand for more energy, which obviously should come from nuclear power. There are industries that are moving into Africa and moving into Ghana per se, basically because of the political stability that we have and the political system that we run in this country. So there are industries that are moving. Just about last 2 years, we have about 4 major car manufacturing companies moving into this space to assemble cars. And from assembling, then we are talking about manufacturing. So there is a need for energy as we move along as a continent. So there are committed plans within the sector. And this is not just for Ghana, but for most African countries. There are committed plans and there are running plans. But we need to do what we call cost optimization of all these, including what we project to come like nuclear power plant. Now, in terms of financing, there are so many financing options that has been used over the years to procure nuclear power plants. But we need to also look at the current financial situations in most African countries. We may not have the muscle to draw a $6 billion loan at a go. We may not have that muscle to pay up, because if we're supposed to build within a year, yes, then it's possible to actually do that. But this is a project that takes about 7 years. If you are unlucky to have some litigation, then you are moving into 10, 15 years of build, whilst you also pay your interest during construction. So it's a tricky situation for a country like Ghana and also most African countries. So you look at the GDP of Ghana currently, the 2019 figures, and you juxtapose the cost of a nuclear plant to about $6 billion. You are doing about 10% of the GDP, which is quite heavy for a country to actually put in one basket. So we need to come out with new ways of financing these nuclear power plants. People have started talking about crowdfunding. Is this an option that we can look at? Well, it has its ups and downs. It has its positive side, negative sides. We have to look at all these things and then look at how best we can actually finance this. People are talking about PPP, public-private participation. We need to actually look at these things and then look into how best we can get it out there. But there is an opportunity that one of the first speakers spoke about in terms of SMR, the small modular reactors. So it's something that we can actually look at. It gives some promise in terms of cost, in terms of time to build. So we have some things to play with, and it's an interesting times that we are in, and we hope that we are able to get the financing and then actually implement the policies that have been set for this country. And I believe these points also go for most African countries and most emerging economies within the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Feds, very much for your presentation. I think it's really interesting what you're saying, especially about the percentage relation with NPP cost and GDP in most of African countries. So thank you very much for that. I'm really, again, looking forward for the discussion. Our next speaker is Dr. Lena Andriolo. Lena is the president of the International Youth Nuclear Congress. She has been involved in IYNC since 2014 and held various responsibilities within the organization. Professionally, Lena has been research engineer at Electricité de France since 2016. She's in charge of R&D development and analysis in the field of civil accident simulations and both fast and light water reactors. Lena, thank you very much for being here today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Christian, and good afternoon, everyone. Let me first say that I'm very happy to be here with you today to discuss advancements in energy and climate goals with low carbon energy systems. And I focus more specifically on youth workforce development to power these clean energy technologies. And therefore, I would like to go to the next slide, please. Okay, so we've heard it before, and we all know that low carbon energy technologies are a must if you want to achieve a clean future and tackle climate change. So we need to work collectively using all available low carbon energy sources to keep carbon emissions at the lowest possible rate. And this is because carbon emissions have no boundaries. But a clean future also has to go hand in hand with a sustainable one, as was also outlined by our moderator earlier today. About 10% of the world population today is still lacking the access to electricity. And the 90% who have access to it do not necessarily have access to low carbon, inexpensive, and dispatchable electricity. With half of my family being French and the other one being German, I can already see how diverse this can be, depending on the country. So we need to ensure a shift towards sustainable clean energy economies, allowing the world population to get access to sustainable electricity to meet climate goals. Of course, every country has its own development plans, as we have heard before, and also its own constraints. But you can make the choice to develop your economies around a sustainable, prosperous, and low-carbon future, providing that you adopt the right frameworks, the right investments, and the right collaborations to allow you to develop low-carbon energy systems, including nuclear. And the good news is that worldwide, there is a tendency to move in this direction. We've almost doubled financing to clean energy since 2010, and we have heard some concrete examples of that by Christine earlier in her speech. But it's not only about having the right frameworks in place. It's also about ensuring that you have a qualified workforce ready to implement those policies and to build these advanced systems, like the SMRs, not only today, but also in the future. Especially in the nuclear field, where you build complex systems such as nuclear reactors and where safety is a priority, you need to have continuously highly skilled scientists and engineers. And a key to ensure this is to make sure today that you transfer knowledge from one generation to another at global levels, and for tomorrow, that you continuously inspire the youth to join the nuclear field. And I'll develop my presentation around these 2 points. So let's first talk about knowledge transfer, since this is also the primary purpose of the International Youth Nuclear Congress, or IYNC, which I represent today. So next slide, please. So IYNC was founded in 1997, and we are a global network of a new generation of nuclear professionals. Beyond knowledge transfer, we also focus on communicating the benefits of nuclear science and applications, promoting the peaceful use of nuclear science and technology, and providing a platform for networking. You can see us as a network of networks, since we are relying on our national existing young generation networks, the YGNs, and currently count 46 active member countries. We have various activities, which I'm not going to detail here, but I will focus on our major one to give you an example for knowledge transfer, which is so important to ensure a sustainable workforce, as I mentioned earlier, and therefore I will detail our biannual conference. Next slide, please. So we hold a conference every 2 years, and the next one is planned in May 2022 in Russia under the theme You Are the Core. So really with a human-centric approach to the nuclear technology. We will have a strong technical program based on 4 pillars: technical tracks, interactive workshops, plenary and panel sessions, and we will also have a mentoring program for young professionals. Overall, this event provides a unique opportunity for us to offer a platform for knowledge transfer and best practice sharings at a global scale, with youth and more experienced generations from all around the world coming together. So I encourage you to look out for the different calls that we will release in the future to join this conference. And I'll stop the self-promotion here. Next slide, please. Okay, so the first point that I mentioned in the beginning of my speech, to ensure a sustainable and qualified workforce, was related to knowledge transfer. And we've just seen a concrete example of that. The second point I mentioned was about how to inspire the youth to join and stay in the field, which you can summarize into how do you attract, develop, and retain young talented people. Of course, every organization has its own strategy with its own competence and talent management process. But here I would like to focus more on the capability of young generation networks such as the IYNC, but also any national or regional young generation network to inspire young talented people to join and stay in the field. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's first focus on the word attract in this 3 words, attract, develop, retain triptych. In order to attract, you need to understand first the young generation. And here, the young generation networks can help. We have seen a change in the workplace over the recent years, going more and more towards a startup environment, and with more and more young people questioning the purpose of their everyday work, really striving to work on what matters to them. And organizations need to understand and constantly adapt to this change. And the YGNs can support in this. For example, we recently launched a new project in IYNC called the World Young Generation and Nuclear Thermometer, with the idea of exactly understanding what inspires or refrains the youth of today at a global scale to join the field. Once you understand your young generation, you also need to properly communicate with it. We all know, and we have heard it before, that nuclear is a great tool to fight climate change with other low carbon energy sources. But the nuclear community has somehow failed in communicating about it. It's, however, important to mention that there has been a shift in communication too in the recent years. Young people today are proudly communicating about nuclear and the role it has to play in the fight against climate change. A very recent example of this is the current pre-COP campaign spearheaded by the UK YGN and supported by IYNC and Nuclear for Climate, more generally speaking. This campaign, called Net Zero Needs Nuclear, from which you can see some pictures here, is a campaign where people are getting engaged on social media by posting why nuclear matters in the fight against climate change, and therefore also ensuring that nuclear is at the table at COP discussions in Glasgow this year. In the same way, you also have young people outside of the nuclear field advocating for its use. And as you can see here on the picture, you may have heard about Isabel Böhmecke, who is a perfect example of that. Next slide, please. So if we now move to the develop and retain part of our triptych, attract, develop, retain, it is also well known that organizations need to provide professional development opportunities if they want to retain young, talented people in the field. And also here, I will give the example of how young generation networks can support this. Through their activities, these networks offer unique opportunities for technical training and leadership training, as well as networking opportunities, really playing their role in ensuring a highly skilled workforce for the future. And I can speak from experience here that I have grown and learned a lot being invested in such a network and working with multicultural teams, also experiencing all the diversity our field has to offer. Another important aspect to consider to retain people in the field is rewards. This doesn't necessarily need to be financially. Personally speaking, it's very rewarding to have my employers support me with time to perform YGN activities. Having organizations in general supporting their employees in such type of activities increases young people's commitment and motivation to stay in the field. Next slide, please. Okay, so to conclude, we have seen that in order to ensure your sustainable workforce for the future, you need to make sure that you properly transfer knowledge and that you continuously inspire the youth to join and stay in the field. And I would personally say that the young generation networks itself have a very important role to play in this. And with this, I would like to revert back to you, Christian.
Thank you very much, Lena. Very good presentation. And it's very interesting to think about the workforce towards the future and the knowledge transfer. We have suffered in the nuclear industry this gap in the past, and this is what IYNC does a perfect and magnificent job in trying to cover this gap and towards the future. And as you said, carbon emissions has no boundaries, so this needs to be international. So thank you very much. Our next speaker is Benjamin Streletsky. I hope I have pronounced that properly. Benjamin has served as global focal point of the SDG7 Youth Constituency, a global network of youth energy organizations and youth professionals in the energy sector. His role is to facilitate meaningful youth engagement of young people with the intergovernmental energy organizations, such as the International Renewable Energy Agency, United Nations Industrial Development Organizations, and others. So, Benjamin, thank you very much for being here today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and you pronounced my last name much better than I could have expected. Could you confirm that you see the screen with the logo now? Yeah, okay, yes, perfect. Great, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It's a great honor to join so many great speakers for this webinar, and great to see so many people joining from around the world. As Christian mentioned, my name is Benjamin. I serve as the global focal point of SDG7 Youth Constituency, and we touched today upon already finance and technological developments, and just before we heard more about the role of youth in workforce. So I would like to touch on the topic of youth in policymaking and how young people are engaging right now, and what are the avenues for young people to engage, because as we may agree or not, but policymaking is clearly one of the big important levers for driving clean energy transition, especially that it needs to accelerate if you want to meet the 2030 and 2050 goals. So the network that I'm representing is part of the major group for children and youth. It's one of the civil society groups within the United Nations system, and so specifically focus on youth, and specifically we bring together young people involved in the clean energy sector. And even though we have not had specific engagements yet focused on nuclear, that's also certainly in our scope of interest. So perhaps this is a starting point for future collaborations. In our current format, we've been working since March 2020, and over the 1 year and a bit, we had some really interesting events and processes that I would like to share with you today. So in principle, what we focus on is trying to promote models of policymaking where young people have a fair share in this decision-making process, where they are sitting at the table together with government representatives as well as other people from the civil society. Because right now, young people under the age of 30 constitute more than 50% of global population. And we are the ones who are going to bear the brunt of impacts of climate change and all other decisions that we are making today. So having all of that in mind, it just makes sense for young people to have their voice heard. Our network engages primarily in the UN system. For those of you who are not familiar, that might be a bit tricky. For those of you who are familiar, it certainly recognize those organizations. Most popular ones, I guess, in this network would be the Clean Energy Ministerial. We also work with IRENA, UNIDO, SC4All, and other organizations that work on clean energy in the intergovernmental space. So we are a global network. We have representatives facilitating the respective regional groups that cover all parts of the world, as you can see here. And we have also thematic areas of work that are presented on this slide. And we have also facilitators for those groups. And overall, as of October 2019 was the last, October 2020, the last time when we conducted the membership review. We had approximately 200 organizations, and those organizations range from anywhere between few to few thousand members, as well as close to 500 individual members from all over the world. So our four main areas of work are policy and advocacy, youth action, capacity building, and knowledge. And I would like to focus on some specific examples of work that we are doing for all those of you who are young youth in the audience, to get an idea of what are the projects you can get involved with us, or what are the models that you can incorporate in your work at home, in your policymaking. And on the other hand, for those of you who are from private sector, public sector, non-governmental sector, to also gain an idea of how young people might be engaging with you, and many of those models that are replicable at different scales. So our flagship project is called Youth Sustainable Energy Hub, and I invite all of you to visit it at youthsehub.org. And this is a platform where we feature 98 selected youth projects in the clean energy sector. As we all know from the previous presentation, there is a lot of important energy transition happening at scale, but in many areas, in particular, last mile energy access in the developing countries, big part of education of our communities, training of young professionals. A lot of this work is really happening at grassroots level, and it's driven by organization, it's driven by young people. So the goal of this platform is to give visibility to this work and try to gather more, mobilize resources to support them, as well as provide mentoring and other forms of support. So this is one of the important areas of work for us. Then second example of work that we organize is to bring together those organizations and make sure that there is a link between what they are doing and what youth are doing. So we organized a briefing and a roundtable where we facilitated this discussion, and it was an opportunity for both sides to voice their plans and expectations and ask questions as to how young people could be involved in their planning, in their activities, and so on. Then we also organize some dedicated youth days with different organizations. Here is a slide about the project that we did with UNIDO, the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. It was a 2-day virtual event in January focused on breaking barriers for young people in the energy workforce and also young entrepreneurs in the energy sector. And that culminated in a call to action where community stakeholders, including governments, companies, and others, can pledge specific action on how they are supporting women and youth in the sector. And just one last example that I would like to share is the International Energy Agency Global Commission People-Centered Energy Transition. So here in the slide, you can see quite a few energy ministers from the world's leading economies and leading greenhouse gas emitters as well. And this is one of our target goals is that our one of targets is to really make sure, as I mentioned in the beginning, that young people are at the Okay.
Hello. Yes. We can hear you back. Yes, we can hear you back. Please proceed. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yes. So now that's just the last slide from my side. If any of you would like to join our network and stay updated, I invite you to follow us. And you can register if you're a young person. You can follow us on social media if you don't count as youth. But either way, hope to stay in touch, and I look forward to participating in the panel. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Benjamin, very much for your presentation and for working towards raising the voice of the youth that actually has shown to have a key role in the climate change and consequences discussion, as we will address in our discussion later on. So thank you to all speakers. This concludes our first part of the webinar. And now we start with our discussions that we will address some questions and also questions for the public. So please, those who are connected, do not hesitate to post your questions on the chat. I would like to start with a question for Michel, but also partially for Seth as well. So first for Michel, I would like to ask you something to give you a chance to explain a little bit better on the SMR that you mentioned. First, I would like to ask you, considering that history is not in our side when it comes to energy transitions, and the reason why I say this is that it took 60 years for coal to go from 5% of the world energy supply to near 50%. It took 30 years for oil to go from 10% to 25%, and 70 for gas to go from 1% to 20%. So this doesn't happen from one day to the other, right? So what are the main policies that will enable this drastically reducing emissions by 2050, according to you? In addition, with the scenarios of decarbonized energy generation matrix and electrified, most carbon-intensive process, in these roles, what roles you see in this decarbonization scenario for SMR to fulfill in the future?
Mark, thank you very much. So there's a lot of things to address through your question. Maybe I'll start by saying that indeed, lead time for transition in the energy sector is quite long, because you're talking about infrastructure, so things will never happen overnight. But what is true is that if you look historically at which technologies have allowing countries to decarbonize electricity mixes at the fastest rate, well, the two technologies that comes top of the list would be nuclear and hydrogen. And for nuclear, we have in mind France in the 80s, Sweden during the 70s. So clearly, we know that nuclear can be one of these technologies that help us to accelerate our transitions toward low carbon technology. And it's not only historically. If you look at the UAE, the Baraka project that is starting to be commissioned when the 4 units will be on the grid, this would be, I think, the fastest reduction of electricity, CO2 emission for electricity of any country in the world. So clearly we know that nuclear, in that respect, would be a key asset. Will also be a key asset would be to really think about complementarities between nuclear and renewables, and not try to oppose technologies. By and large, there are many ways through which nuclear and renewables can complement each other, and it's by thinking about these technologies together that we can probably be the most effective. And all of that means that in terms of policies, you need to think about designing policies that enable a level playing field and to enable us to make the full use of these complementarities. Now, not to take too much time, you asked me about small modular reactors, and I think I touched on it in my presentation, so I will not repeat myself. But clearly, what we can see, what is very exciting about small modular and advanced reactors is that it can really broaden the contribution that nuclear can make to global decarbonization effort. Because when it comes to decarbonizing heavy industry, to decarbonizing some areas of transport, when we look at the massive requirements for a low carbon hydrogen production, when we think about all these coal power plants that we're going to have to replace in the coming 2 decades, well, we see that having small modular reactors or advanced reactors would be a key asset to really start to decarbonize these sectors, because we are lagging behind in this field, and we see clearly that with nuclear there is a path to be successful to decarbonize and to therefore be successful in decarbonizing.
So just to take it from the Christian,
please go ahead.
I believe most countries, and I would say all countries, would have an energy policy. But one thing that is actually missing in our part of the world, especially sub-Saharan Africa, is the implementation of the policies. So you have very nice policies that speaks very well, but its implementation, it's either non-existent or very, very slow. Now, the issue of SMR, I think we need to look at it and look at it very well, because there's this thing that's fighting against SMR that I personally not too happy about. It's this issue of first of a kind. So technically, SMR has been with us since the 1950s. All the proof of concept plants were SMRs, were small modular reactors. So, and current SMRs are taking design, they are taking experience from either PWRs and fossil power plants. So as a nuclear world, we need to define what a first of a kind is, and then properly define this so that in going forward, we can make use of these SMRs and make use of them very well. My third point has to do with policies that has to do with carbon emissions. In Europe now, I think things are beginning to shape up in terms of carbon emissions. Some of these things need to be put in place, even in emerging countries or emerging economies that are in Africa and all over the world. And when some of these things come in place, you will see the rapid development of some of these power plants, the nuclear power plants, including the SMRs, that will come up even much faster than maybe coal took or even the fossil plants took. Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you, Seth, for your answer. Thank you, Michel. And there's a question from the public for you, Seth. The question is, can you compare the price of electricity in Africa versus developed countries? May it affect the affordability of nuclear projects in the continent? But I was very interested in what you said on this comparison of an NPP respect to the GDP of most of the African countries, and why this is, of course, challenging or not fully possible to take a financial in such a percentage. What will you answer our participants?
So cost comes in a variety of ways. So nuclear may cost a little bit, let's say than a gas power plant, okay, or a combined cycle gas power plant, or even hydro or some coal. But there are other aspects of the nuclear power plant cost that most people don't look at. There is one plant that actually takes care of its waste. There's one plant that pays more than any of the other power plants. There's one plant that is highly regulated that you need to spend a lot of money in terms of getting your plant regulated. So the question I ask, and even talk about capacity factor that I don't want to even go into. So the question I ask, are these plants that we are comparing nuclear power plant to, are they taking care of their waste? So you talk about a plant like solar, that the cost is gradually coming down, and it's coming down real fast. So in terms of the least avoidable cost of electricity, when the plant is not working, what is in its place that's working? How are we going to dispose of the panels? How are we going to dispose of the batteries? Who is going to take care of it? Some of these things are not taken into consideration. So you always compare apples to oranges. And that's where we have a challenge. We always compare base loads to intermittent power plants. And that's always where we have a challenge. We need to situate things in their right perspective so that we can discuss them dispassionately.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you very much for your answer. I would like to follow for a question for Christine. We discuss about, we are talking about certain regions in Africa and the challenging about decarbonizing and new technologies and how we can achieve the growth of energy consumption, but as well, or demand, but as well in a way that we don't add any carbon to the atmosphere. So of course, new technologies, not only in the energy generation, but also in the processes, innovation on that is really needed. And Christine, you were talking about how somehow to help bring in ideas to reality. And what I believe is that the countries that build great zero carbon companies and industries in this sense will be the ones that lead the global economy in the coming decades. And partially this is because there's a great business opportunity, especially in those emerging countries and that will become customers and very interested in these technologies. I don't know if you agree with this view, but I would like also to ask you, what would you advise to policymakers who are willing to become these leading countries in the net zero carbon technologies in the future?
So I think there's a few things to consider, and yes, I do agree with your view. I think we're going to see leaders emerge, I guess what I would say, from non-traditional spaces that will take us, help accelerate our work towards a clean energy future. So a couple of things. I think policymakers need to early on ensure there is an ease of financing. That is not typically something that you can unravel quickly, and you need to look at your policies and engage with those industries and make sure that their financing options are supportive and available when needed. I think the other aspect is policymakers need to look across the globe at other successful, GAIN is just one example, but how can you use the government dollar to support the private projects to show what is possible? When you show what is possible, you unlock the private investment as well. And, you should make sure that regulation doesn't slow you down or get in your way as you're reviewing nuclear technologies as well. We're seeing some countries sign MOUs to share their technical reviews between regulators. And I think that's another way that we can reduce the burden and get these projects underway more quickly. And I want to amplify a point that Seth made, and I appreciate him saying it because it actually hadn't occurred to me. Be careful with your language, okay? these are, you know, private industry. If they're going to lead here, they're going to be dispassionate about how they evaluate these technologies. And when you label something as a new technology, the risk profile is higher. Don't leave behind the experience that we have. Don't overinflate it either. But just because we're trying to distance ourselves potentially from projects that haven't been as successful as we want, understand what happened with those projects and be able to communicate it, but don't lose the valuable experience that we have with those technologies. That's an important aspect and consideration of investment as well. And lastly, I just think it's important for all of us to consider your partner in any project you do going forward, especially in an energy project. These are typically 100-year relationships. So choose carefully. Thanks.
Right, Christine, thank you very much. There's another question related with this that I would like to ask you. And this is basic on policies, because from tax rules to environmental regulations, these policies have a huge impact on how people and companies behave. So we don't get to zero carbon emissions unless we get policies right, in my opinion. And also this needs to be done in an international effort in a way. So around the world, it is usually the case that many of the environmental laws and regulations in place today were not designed with climate change in mind, but mainly thinking of other problems to address. However, the change partially depends on the election cycle, and some parties today disparage the human influence over climate change. I believe you see this as a challenge. What's your reaction to that? What will be the policies, or what you're thinking on this?
So I think there are some good things that we see in this space. We are seeing some bipartisan support. But I think what's most important is we seem to be moving beyond the debate of whether climate change is real and seeing the opportunity that this transition is for business. This is a real opportunity. And along with that, we're also seeing the opportunity to improve our communities and improve our environment overall. And so with that, when you consider policies, if you get the opportunity to brief policymakers or their staff, consider their point of view. Don't tell your story. Understand how they are looking at the particular problem and ensure that you bring forward the information about our technologies that fit into the way they're thinking through the problem. One of the things at GAIN that we're trying to do is when we speak in clean energy events, it's to talk about the magnitude of the challenge. You mentioned before 51 billion tons a day, right? How, how do we start to break that down? How do we look at that? And we work backwards to the technologies that we need. It will be different for every region because they have different resources available to them. We need to be able to say that sometimes maybe nuclear is not the right answer for them. Maybe nuclear is a longer term answer. Don't lead with the reactor technology. Lead and discuss the problem that's being solved from the audience's perspective. And I think that's where we'll garner more support. I'm also encouraged seeing countries that as they look at a post-COVID economic recovery, they are using this as an opportunity to accelerate investment. So, and I think there's a variety of different white papers from different governments to look at that and potentially share within your own country what others are doing to invest their money post-COVID differently to help us all bounce back from the past year.
Thank you very much, Christine. And this gives me a nice way to move forward to Lena with the next question. Because I want to, we are all under still some restrictions depending on the country. Here in the Netherlands, a lot of the economical activity is stopped. because of COVID-19. And we saw that during the first month of the 2020, several countries have been developing wild stimulus plans to rebuild their economy after the deep damage caused by COVID-19. These plans will shape economy and society for decades to come, I believe. Therefore, the COVID-19 recovery is a chance to redesign a sustainable, inclusive economy, enforcing and revitalizing industry, but also preserving biodiversity. So I would like to ask Lena, do you think that nuclear should have a more significant role in the current decision makers' discussions towards the zero carbon emission and in this relaunch or re-stimulus plans after COVID?
Thank you for the question, Christian. So first of all, I agree with you. I think that post-crisis, the countries have a unique chance to reboost their economy in a sustainable way, and therefore also through acceleration of the pace to meet our global climate goals. So nuclear has to be in those discussions because nuclear is a technology that is available today and therefore can directly allow you to tackle climate change from really today. And this is key given the very short time frame that we have to fight climate change. Apart from being a low carbon energy source that is available today, I think nuclear also needs to be considered because it provides inexpensive, flexible and reliable electricity, which is something that you need to take into consideration because there is no need in investing in a low carbon energy that is potentially super expensive and that no one will be able to afford. So the idea is really not to leave anyone behind. And if you look at the long-term potential or opportunities that investments into nuclear energy can provide, I would say that we have seen in the past, also relying on my own country, I would say energy policy, is that nuclear is creating long-term sustainable job opportunities for your societies. And in addition, the final point I think that you can consider to bring nuclear into the discussions is really that it helps in combination with other low carbon energy sources to reduce imports from fossil fuels, therefore really improving also your electricity security, which is one of the major points which was also outlined from the post-COVID crisis analysis.
Thank you, Lena, very much. And following with the youth, I would like to ask Benjamin. It is clear that today's youth will be paying the current and future consequences of irresponsible decisions now and in the past, but they are not yet in the decision maker seats, right? When it comes to the climate crisis and reaching zero carbon emission, what should more senior generations do to account for the voices of the youth?
Thank you so much, Kristen. It's a great question that I think many governments are grappling with right now, as we're seeing, for example, in Poland, where I come from, not so recently established advisory group with the Ministry of Climate Change. There is a youth advisory group with the UN Secretary General. They are also focusing on climate change. So there is definitely appetite for more, for listening to youth and trying to understand what are their perspectives. And I think the Rise Societies of Future and youth activism really showcase that youth are being successful in putting their message out there. And I hope this will continue, and I hope we'll continue creating those spaces, in particular that will be able to really speak to ministers and people who meet behind the closed doors. And because transparency is a key, and once the deliberations, their outcomes are available to the public and people are able to react and people are educated about what those decisions mean to their future, the policymakers are way less likely to put our future in danger and jeopardize the integrity of our planet. So in terms of some additional ways to for for the more senior generations to incorporate the views of young people. I think in addition to this policy advocacy perspective, there is a lot more to be done in terms of availability of different opportunities. All of those things that were discussed earlier today in the webinar, including access to finance, including new jobs, training, education, and so on, all of those should have designated avenues, channels to reach young people, especially financing of course, if we're talking about financing nuclear energy projects at a very, very different scale than if we're talking about financing sustainable energy youth initiatives that are often solar PV or maybe wind or maybe biomass. So these are different scales and they require different types of financing, but we need to empower young people because they're the ones who are bringing the change to their communities. And the last aspect of this topic of listening to young people doesn't mean only doing things for young people. Youth participation doesn't mean that every output of work will be having young people or youth on the title, because it's about caring about all of our society and caring about all age groups and thinking about the future when current young people won't be young people anymore. This is really the future that we want to create for us as adults, for our children, and for children of our children. So when we think about youth, let's not get stuck with this idea that people between 18 and 30, this is the topic of our conversation period. We need to think more in terms of the whole society and really incorporate the views of all people, including experts that are not beyond their youth.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. I fully agree with you. There's one question from the public for you. You mentioned your engagement with IRENA in your presentation. The question is, what advice do you have, or how can youth in the nuclear community better engage IRENA and others in the renewable community for a stronger partnership?
This is a great question. Thank you. I saw it before. I think that, so let me start by saying I'm not an expert on nuclear, and definitely I'm not well suited to compare nuclear and what we usually call renewable energy sources. So I don't want to tackle that from any sort of technical approach. I would say in terms of politics and communications, nuclear is being perceived very differently than, let's say, solar PV, wind, and so on in this sustainable energy space where our organization usually operates. And I believe my main suggestion would be for those who do try to bring nuclear into this renewable energy space to think, to work on communications really, and how can we align this message? Because I think much of it stems from concerns. And again, I'm not technical. I don't know. I don't want to comment if those concerns are founded or unfounded. But it's really about trying to find what is important and how does nuclear address those issues of not only cheap and net and clean energy. It's also about creating jobs. It's also avoiding disposal of pollutants and so on and so on. So how does nuclear fit with that? And I personally would be very interested to see more of youth nuclear energy student groups, organizations, and so on come in and engage, because this is, once we start having these conversations, we can better understand how we can work together. So I shared the contact details in the chat, so really hope that something more will start from this conversation today.
Thank you, Benjamin. I'm actually very pleased to hear you saying this, and I believe that I really would like to know or to hear Lena reacting on this. Lena, what do you have to say about this? And maybe you can also mention what IYNC or similar organizations can do for empower the youth against climate change, but also in partnership, as Benjamin was saying.
Yeah, thank you, Christian. So coming back to what Benjamin was saying just before, indeed, I think that we need all to collaborate because we have one same goal, which is really to fight climate change, and we need all low carbon energy sources for that, and all young generation networks who are really amplifying this message. Now, coming back to your question of what organizations like IYNC or similar ones can do regarding empowerment for young people, I would say, to tackle climate change. I would give several examples of that. First, young generation networks give perfect opportunities for education and training. And this is important because, as Benjamin also outlined, the youth of today is actually the leaders of tomorrow. And therefore, you need to have well-trained, well-informed people to be able to really take decisions in the future towards what options to take to tackle climate change. The second point I think that is very important to highlight for young generation networks such as IYNC is that we provide youth a voice, I would say, and really unite voices at a global level, really making sure that youth is present in like climate conferences. As I mentioned earlier, we are working with the UK YGN to make sure that youth and nuclear are present at COP. And we, of course, do this in partnership with other partner organizations and other initiatives like the Nice Future initiative today, or like the IAEA, to really amplify the reach. A third point I think that we can mention is that we really encourage also locally and regionally to have youth initiatives in this regard, providing grants opportunities to really support this type of initiatives. And finally, I think that another aspect that we are bringing forward is to really inspire youth to think out of the box and to really make sure that you get creative about finding the solutions to the current problems that we are having. And we have a specific project that I'm not going to detail too much here, which is called Innovation for Nuclear at IYNC, which is an innovation contest who is exactly about this, inspiring the youth to think about innovative solutions in line with the Sustainable Development Goals.
Thank you, Lena, very much for your answer. And I would like to close this webinar with one last question addressed first to Seth, and also I would like to hear Michel after again. We are looking to a scenario by the end of the century with the world population near 10 billion. So this is not only the increase in the global energy demand because of development, but also because of a growth in the population. And currently, near 40% of the world greenhouse effect emissions are produced by the 16 richest part of the population. So after what China did, that lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, and partially this was done by building coal-fired electric plants very cheaply. And the next wave of developing countries, like different nations through Africa, are looking to do the same. But right now, coal plants are the most economical option. So you talk a little bit about how you see this challenge in your region, but I would like to hear you to hear about what are the opportunities that you see in this scenario.
So maybe I take a bite at it before Michel comes in. So there are some things that we take lightly as a nuclear community because maybe we are not communicating our story so well. So it's not just about cost. It's about a smooth economic or a smooth opening of the economy. Now, there are technical issues and social issues within the nuclear industry that we may not even be able to model and show that this is what we are set to actually do. So let me just give a typical example in a sub-Saharan African country. So a career woman at a point in time has to wash the clothes or her dresses with her hands. So you just take into consideration the number of hours that she takes to actually wash. Someone in the advanced country uses a washing machine. In 45 minutes, 1 hour, that washing is done with very little effort. Okay, so there are issues that are made possible with the availability of clean, stable electricity that we cannot even fathom, we cannot even imagine where these things go. And this affects all the SDGs within the SDGs that are set up. So I see energy, and I see the nuclear energy as the center piece where each of these things connect to, including health. Okay, so there are issues that we may not even be able to fathom and actually explain to people how these things happen. But when you come to our section or our continent, we see some of these things every day, and we see how best we can solve it through nuclear energy. I think I will just give Christine the last bit, and then maybe she can.
Yeah, thank you, Seth, for that, and it's very interesting. You know, I'm originally from Argentina, and there are also large places in the country where people do not have proper access to electricity, and this has a huge impact when projects address these topics on gender equality, on the opportunities as well for different people to grow in many different areas, of course. Thank you very much, Seth. And I don't know, Michel, if you would like to add anything or see your views.
But I was on mute, apologies. No, I mean, just very briefly to indeed restate that access to electricity, to energy more generally, is key to economic development. In that respect, you know, important to be clear that typically solar panel, solar photovoltaic in Africa is making significant contribution to improve livelihood in many parts. The same can be applied to wind, but there is a time when energy needs are so important that you're gonna need nuclear power if you want to have long-term sustainable growth. I put in the chat a recent paper from the IMF, and the evidence from this paper are overwhelming that investment in nuclear is historically a key driver to long-term economic growth in many countries. So you need to think about investment and nuclear power as not only as a mean to improve access to energy, but also as a mean to you know, further support broader economic development agenda in this part of the world.
Thank you very much, Michel, for your views. And well, with this, we finished our webinar. We are right on time. So I would like to thank you all, the speakers, for all your views. And this is wonderful discussion. It was very interesting. And I also would like to thank very much to the participants that have been there, posing questions and helping us enhance this discussion with the view. So thank you very much for your time. And hope that we can see each other later in the next webinar.
Thank you.